In this video, we're going to talk about the Punic Wars. In the last video, we established that Rome has now become a power in the Mediterranean, not only in Italy. And so we're now seeing Roman wars, the expansion of Roman influence extending beyond Italy and into the Western Mediterranean. And this period witnesses the emergence of the very famous rivalry between Rome and Carthage, as both compete for influence over the island of Sicily. Sicily was a crucial junction linking the Eastern and Western Mediterranean. Now, Carthage had developed as a Phoenician colony in the late 9th century. And we talked about the Phoenicians very briefly in the second week of the class. We talked about how they were the great first seafarers, traders across the Mediterranean, and then were overtaken by the Greeks. And so Tyre, the biblical city of Tyre, is the leading city of the Phoenicians. And so Carthage is a colony of the Phoenicians, just in the same way that the Greek cities set up colonies around the Mediterranean. But Carthage became rich and powerful in its own right, gained its independence from Tyre around 600. So, you kind of compare Roman Republic being founded around 500, independence of Carthage around 600. There are some similarities there. And Carthage became one of the wealthiest cities in the world. Craftsmen working with precious metals, all of these raw materials were transported to Carthage. Merchants from Carthage brought goods from sub-Saharan Africa, from Arabia and India, from Spain, from Britain, from Scandinavia, and really all over the known world. And so at the same time, Carthage is also expanding by gaining territory in Africa and also by establishing its own colonies around the Mediterranean and the Western Mediterranean. Now, as we discussed in the last video, there's still a Greek presence in Italy, especially in the east coast of Italy, and competition develops between the Carthaginians and the Greeks in Sicily during the 6th century. In 280, a band of mercenaries seized a Greek city called Messana, and they appealed to Carthage for help. The Carthaginians were delighted to have an excuse to get involved in Sicily and exercise more influence in Sicily. And so they come in, they take control of the city, and then they refuse to leave. And so now these same rebels against Greek control now appeal to the Romans. Now, the Romans have no obligation to these mercenaries. You could argue that Sicily is far enough away that it doesn't pose a threat to Rome. You can argue that Carthage has interests that make the conquest of Rome far removed from its overall strategic plan. But the Romans determined that it was part of their policy of defensive aggression to resist the threat of Carthage, resist the continued expansion of Carthage, lest Carthage become too strong and eventually overwhelm them. And so this leads to the First Punic War. And so the First Punic War is interesting because it's a war that's fought primarily at sea. This highly favors the Carthaginians, who are renowned as great seafarers and having a very powerful navy. The Romans, by contrast, have never built a navy before. They have to build a navy totally from scratch. They have to learn, and so they find a wrecked warship on the coast and they kind of reverse engineer it. They have to learn how to row it for the first time. They practice doing this, sitting on benches on the beach. And so we see the Romans' pragmatism, their flexibility in building a navy, and then building an instrument called the corvus, which you can see from the slides. We're on to a new slide now. It was a bridge that could be dropped down onto another ship, and this was a way of turning a naval battle into a land battle. And so then the Romans could use their land army to cross into the other ship, and that was where they had an advantage. Now, despite this energy on the part of the Romans, their fleet was sunk several times. You see a massive decline in the Roman population according to the census records that are available on the slide. And sometimes the fleet won battles and then was sunk in a storm. And so the Romans are unable to win the war, but they also don't give up either. And eventually the Carthaginians decide to give up and to sue for peace. So just as in the Pyrrhic Wars, Romans lose a lot of battles, but it's the fact they don't give up that means they end up winning the war. The Carthaginians are forced to evacuate Sicily, and they are forced to pay the costs of the war. And so the Romans are going to move in and seize Sicily in 227, and it will become the first province of the Roman Empire. It doesn't have the same privileges as the Latin towns in Italy, but it is still under Roman rule, even though that rule is pretty distant. There's a Roman praetor there to govern the province, but there's not a lot of heavy-handed Roman oversight. Now, at the time, this probably didn't seem like a big deal. The Carthaginians had kind of rolled the dice, tried to expand into Sicily. The Romans have rolled the dice and tried to expand into Sicily. The Romans have won. But what's significant is that the Romans have gained control of the sea. And where they started out, where Carthage is good at fighting at sea, Rome good at fighting at land, Rome's now gained an advantage in both those areas. And Carthage's loss of the sea would be crucial in future wars. Move on now to the next slide. The Romans continued to establish their authority in the Mediterranean, defeating Greek pirates, defeating a final effort of the Gauls to invade Italy. Meanwhile, the Carthaginians had been trying to recover their strength in Spain, which was a traditional stronghold, an area where they had a number of colonies. They were led by Hannibal, a man named Hannibal, who was the son of Hamilcar, who was one of the most successful generals against the Romans in the First Punic War. And Hamilcar hated the Romans and had forced his son, or trained his son Hannibal, to swear an oath that he would destroy the city of Rome. In 219, the Second Punic War began. The city of Saguntum appealed for help to Rome against the Carthaginians. Now, what's interesting is that according to the terms of the Treaty of the First Punic War, Rome had said they would not interfere with cities as far south in Spain as Saguntum, that they would leave those territories for the Carthaginian sphere of influence. Again, however, we see the Romans' policy of defensive aggression coming to the fore here, that the Romans ordered the Carthaginians to withdraw. And Hannibal refused, and so the Romans declared war, even though they're not able to do much about what's going on in Spain. So it's important to recognize that while, yes, the Carthaginians are the initial aggressors, the Romans are certainly pushing the envelope. It's not as though they set up the terms of the treaty, the Carthaginians break the terms, the Romans go in and defeat them. It's that the Romans set up the terms of the treaty and then push those terms a little further to try and further expand their power. Hannibal would surprise the Romans by famously leading his army that included 17 war elephants through Gaul, across the Alps, and into Italy. Now, only one of the elephants survived, wasn't very useful in the battles. But once Hannibal arrived in Italy, he won a series of terrific victories against the Romans that established him as one of the leading generals throughout history of all time. At the Trebia River, he lured the Romans into an ambush, and 3/4 of the army were killed. Lake Trasimene, he ambushed the Romans again, and 25,000 Romans were killed for the loss of only 2,000 Carthaginians, the greatest ambush in the history of the ancient world. The Battle of Cannae, perhaps his most famous victory, in which he was able to surround an entire Roman force and cut it to pieces. In this battle, 80 senators who had been fighting in the Roman army were killed, the worst Roman defeat in their history. What is interesting, however, is that after the victory, the surviving consul, so 2 Roman consuls had led the army and led it terribly badly. He escaped with a few remaining soldiers back to Rome. And he was praised by the Romans for not despairing and not giving up and not just surrendering, but returning to his post to continue to try and carry out his office. Meanwhile, Hannibal was condemned by the Carthaginians for not fully following up his victory and immediately conquering the Romans. And this exchange of perspectives is pretty revealing. It shows once again the tenacity of the Romans, their unwillingness to give up. And at the same time, it shows that Hannibal is not going to receive the support from the Carthaginians, the same support that the Romans are receiving from his government that he needs in order to be successful. It did seem, however, that the city of Rome must fall. A man named Fabius Cunctator, in this darkest hour of the Republic, was appointed as a dictator, so he was given these emergency powers. He knew he was not powerful enough to risk battle with Hannibal right now. So all he could do was shadow Hannibal, defend the fortifications of Rome. And Hannibal at this time, although he had won these victories, he didn't have quite enough troops to assault Rome. And so he was hoping that the other Italian cities who had been ruled over by the Romans would join his side, and they didn't. And this was critical for the eventual Roman success in this war. And that's because the Romans' Italian allies remembered what had happened with Pyrrhus. and in the First Punic War, and in the Samnite Wars going back before that. They knew that the Romans weren't going to give up. They were confident the Romans would make a comeback, and they remained loyal to the Romans and didn't join the Carthaginian army. The Carthaginians, meanwhile, were unable to send Hannibal the necessary reinforcements to complete the conquest of Rome. Why? Because Rome controlled the seas, and Rome was able to cut off supplies and reinforcements from reaching Hannibal, while at the same time they began launching attacks against Spain, important colony, key source of Carthaginian wealth. Gradually, the Romans began to secure control, including securing control of Spain, while Hannibal's campaign didn't make much progress in Italy. In 205, the new Roman general Scipio, who had been so successful in Spain by copying Hannibal's tactics, took a Roman army to Africa to attack the Carthaginian homeland. Now, Hannibal was forced to return and defend the city of Carthage, and he was defeated in 203 at the Battle of Zama, and the Carthaginians were forced to make peace. They were forced to give up any claims to rule or control in Spain. They were forced to reduce their navy again. They were forced to pay for the costs of the war. They were forced to required to ask the Romans for their permission to wage future wars. And so once again, this war is a testament to the Romans' resilience, that they were willing to continue to fight on in this conflict until eventually they were successful. It was also seen as a critical moment in the history of Rome. The Rome had faced this dark hour where they were almost completely defeated, and they had survived and they had been victorious. And so it makes Rome the dominant power in the Western Mediterranean. The Romans now have seized control of Spain as well as Italy, and they are dominating North Africa. They might not rule it yet, but they're certainly in control.